So in this video we look at the all-important sculpting brushes. So as I showed in earlier videos, we have the quick access wheel here, which I'm going to be using to switch between brushes. You can switch here. Obviously the settings are here as well, and you can collapse that, but I'll just be using the quick access wheel, and I highly advise that you do too. So I'll start with move. I was going to give this a dedicated video because recently they've added, and it's a fantastic addition to the program, the elastic move brush. So here's the default move brush that was there before, but they've also added these elastic options. So basically it's like the Pixar elastic, based on the Pixar elastic brush. Quite a few programs have implemented it, and it's fantastic. It really adds a huge amount. You can do so much with the move brush, and especially in VR. This is where it's so hard to explain this to people who have never tried VR and they sculpt on the desktop. How good the likes of this warp or move elastic in 6 DOF in VR is. It's just absolutely, I can't really exaggerate it enough how good it is compared to just using a move brush on a desktop sculpting program. There's absolutely no comparison whatsoever. This is just, it's hard to explain. You really have to use it yourself. But as I say as well, this was added recently. This is still in the beta, but it's going to be added into the 2026 version. And basically it's a deformable move brush, but also volume preserving. And you know, when you're doing this in VR, as I said, it's a whole different. It really has to be experienced to be believed, because you can obviously in VR you can, you know, you're moving with 6 DOF, so you're not limited by the desktop, the view of the desktop, and that's the default one there. And then you can a move elastic is a sort of a global, sort of globally deforms, and then it also has a fall off, so you can change the range to be less or more. So with this move, it's probably not a good example shown on this fella here, but with this move elastic, they also recently added, if I pull this out and then I start increasing the strength, it'll pull towards the cursor to a point, and then you can see it's not collapsing in on itself as a normal move brush would. It's preserving the volume. So yeah, anybody for quick horns, and then you can lower the strength, bring it back down, increase the strength, and you can do some pretty cool stuff with it as well. So this kind of has to be experienced to appreciate just how good it is in all sorts of turn the strength down in all sorts of scenarios. But like you can, I'm not joking you, and I have done it. You can actually, I didn't do this one now, but you can sculpt an entire head just with, pretty much just with the move. I've done it in Substance Modeler as well, and I'm hoping that they add automatic revoxelization, so that every time you move, it's going to remesh. And then, because obviously, this is quite high res, I might just take this down maybe. Obviously, when you start increase the strength, when you start moving, you're gonna, you know, get to a point where the polys are completely stretched. So, you know, you could move it in small increments like that. And every time I move, if this was automatically remeshing, you wouldn't get broken. This is the difference, I suppose. In Substance Modeler, it's constantly revoxelizing every time, so you obviously don't get this type of thing. But the dev said that this can be added in polys as well, so that it's just, well, like you can do it here, and we have voxel remesh, so you can just keep doing it and then voxel remesh. And the only problem is then, as it gets bigger, the voxel size changes with the volume of the mesh. And then you can also do it with So if I turn on, say, this app's the resolution here, that's dynamic topology. I'm kind of going off the whole thing about the brushes, but I sort of have to explain this with the move brush, the move elastic. Turn these off, and let's see what that's like. Right, so it's decent enough resolution. So you can just move this out and then smooth, and then you can also turn down the smooth strength or use this regularize brush, which I'll explain in a while. So with a low smooth, you can just keep moving this and then smooth over it, and you get the same, pretty much technically the same type of thing that Substance Modeler is doing by automatically revoxelizing. So, this is just so good to use. And then obviously then you can use inflate brush as well. Inflate it up, switch back to move, keep moving it out. So I'm not going to spend much more time on this because it should have really had its own video, I suppose, and I might do them with better examples, but I'll move on to the other brushes then. And anybody coming from a sculpting program, you're gonna be already aware of what these are. They're gonna be pretty obvious to you, but they're the classics, clay. The classic clay. I'll just turn off this dynamic topology. And the difference with this clay, and what I will say is that devs have said that they're going to rework the brushes. Some of the brushes definitely need some improvements, including the clay. It's pretty decent, but there's an issue here with the way it's set up with this height limit. It maxes out at whatever the limit is, and then you have to keep pressing the trigger over and over again. It's a decent clay brush, but you just have to keep pressing the trigger. So hopefully they're going to fix that. But otherwise, it is a pretty decent clay brush. It has all the hallmarks of a clay brush that you'd expect from the likes of ZBrush, or even Nomad Desktop recently. So we've got our usual settings here. You can switch that to square. I don't like using that because it keeps spinning around as a surface. I just keep it on circle. You've got our different constraints that you'd be used to. Raycast just means you can raycast to the surface, so you don't have to sculpt on the surface. But I don't like that at all. So you have to test that out. Some people prefer that. Rotate along drag so that the brush is rotating. You can see it here with the you can see it there with when I put the square on, it's rotating along the surface normals. But as I say, I just leave that on. I think it's on by default. This snaps the cursor to the surface, so it kind of behaves rather than being volume based. Because we're in VR here, obviously we can go in our depth. We can move our brush in and out of the surface. Whereas if you turn this on, snap the surface, it's going to kind of behave like you would be sculpting just on a desktop program, because it's always snapped to the surface. So you lose that kind of volume-based VR thing. It can be handy for something like the crease brush, which I'll show in a minute, or the trim as well. So I'll turn that off. This is aligns the brush perpendicular to the surface at all times. So the same thing, 60 OF and VR. You can rotate your hand around, so that's going to rotate the brush. So this will keep it perpendicular. Invert the brush. So that's just using this button here. I'm never going to use it from the menu. You just press this invert here, and that will give you, it's like holding down Alt in ZBrush, or I think Control is the default in Blender to give you the the inverted brush, or the opposite of the brush. So that button there in the primary controller, top one, that's going to be to go into the surface, obviously, and out, back out. Then we have front faces only, so ignore back facing. People will be used to that as well. So on thin surfaces, that it's not going to be sculpting on both sides. It's only going to be sculpting on the side that you're facing. And then the other one, edit connected surfaces only. So if this mesh is made up of multiple meshes, that once you start sculpting on one, like move topological, I suppose, or the topological setting in ZBrush. It's only going to sculpt or affect the first element of the mesh that you start sculpting on, of mesh elements that aren't connected. So that's pretty much that. Your strength, view size based, that's, if you zoom out, it's like dynamic brush size in ZBrush, depending on how close you are, how far away, the brush size will change depending on your setting here. The fall off, it's just the same as fall off in any other sculpting program. You can change the profile here and change the fall off, so it's going to be rough or completely smooth. This, I'm going to put this in its own video as well. Dynamic topology, that's this resolution setting here. Steady stroke is just like lazy mouse. I'm going to actually switch to a different brush and turn on the steady stroke. You can see here as well, obviously there's different settings. So this has height limit here, steady stroke, and then crease brush doesn't have height limit, but then it has a pinch extra settings. So some of the brushes have their own context settings. So yeah, might as well move on now to the crease brush. Crease brush is another brush that kind of behaves a bit funny sometimes in certain circumstances if the mesh is too high res, or but that's one that the devs know about, and they're definitely they've been improving it all along this year, so I think they're going to keep further improving these brushes. Pinch radius, then you can just add extra pinch to the brush, and same thing with fall off, the dynamic resolution. And I forgot to mention with the clay, but we have our stroke modes here, so I'll switch back to clay, stamp, and you can select whatever and turn off steady stroke, turn up the strength maybe. This is quite low res, so it won't show up too well, but yeah, it's just like drag rect and ZBrush, and you can add your own here. Again, custom files, add whatever one you want, and that is on stamp mode, spray. It's just like a random sort of a spray across the surface, and just back to the normal. And then, as I say there, you can add your own alphas. Replace alpha, not sure what that is, but yeah, you can add your own alphas here. And that's pretty much it then. Brush tip shape, and then these different settings here, as I said, I'll go over this maybe in its own video. So yeah, that's all pretty much the basic settings. Crease brush I've showed, but crease brush as well has some align perpendicular. It has some of these set by default that just happen to work better for the brush, and sometimes, depending on what you're doing, snapping this to the surface can work. Or obviously in VR we can sculpt away. We don't have to see what we're sculpting. We can sculpt out of our view, but you can see there how snap to the surface. See the way it's kind of wobbling around there because it's snapping to all different surface normals. So depending on what you're doing, that can be useful or not. So that is that for the crease brush. The trim brush is sort of a mix of a trim dynamic or a scrape brush in Blender, and then you can switch between dynamic and keep edges. So keep edges sort of polishes it then up to surface angle changes like H polish, but not really. This is another brush that it's almost there but not quite there. I would like to see this definitely improved to make it more like, especially H polish. Every program seems to have trouble trying to replicate the ZBrush H polish brush. So it'd be good if these were maybe separated out into two different brushes, like trim dynamic and H polish. but these two settings essentially kind of give you that. And then the stairs one, which I don't really use much, but I believe it kind of behaves like in ZBrush trim adaptive. So it's much rougher, and obviously then you can turn up the strength. It sort of digs in. I think it's like trim adaptive, if anyone knows. ZBrush digs in much more. So I'd switch between these two, depending on your strength. See there the way it's going in quite a lot, even though the strength is quite low. So it can be, a difference there in a small strength change. These are all things that I'd sort of like to see tweaked and improved. If they upgrade the brushes, and then keep edges, sharpen it up. But the problem with this is it doesn't really follow unless it's really well defined. It doesn't really follow a curved surface. It tends to leave sort of facets, whereas ZBrush will just fly around that. You have to kind of work the surface a bit more with this, but it's not bad. Like, you can kind of get away with it, you can use it, but definitely needs some tweaking. That's trim, masking. I showed briefly in one of the other videos. You have your masking, and then you have all these settings here. So mask entire mesh, invert the mask, clear the mask, blur, sharpen, split mask geometry. So those features, or delete mask geometry, those features there are actually in here. I think it was mesh density. No. I can't remember. Merge and split there and here. They're ones then that you can also. I'm not sure if you can add them to these. Oh, you can actually, yeah, because it has the masking tools. Or did they add them here? No, they're not actually here. Maybe they'll add them in the future. But yeah, so that's your masking tool. So as I mentioned earlier as well, I have clear mask and invert mask there because it's handy to just have them there. It saves you from having to swap out the brushes. And that is pretty much it for masking. You can mask here depending, cavities, bumps, or just averaged. And then you have different settings here for contrast and detail, and the usual stuff up here. Masking mode, remove from mask, and you can do these blur mask here and remove from mask. So it's like I mentioned earlier on, the invert here. You can just hold that down, click it across, toggle it across, and then you can just remove from the mask, add to the mask, and then I'm just quickly switching between the two. And then a nice feature is your secondary trigger is the modifier key for your smooth brush. But if you have the mask on, then it's context sensitive for the mask, so you can actually blur your mask holding down the secondary trigger here and just blur the mask, which is very handy. So invert the mask and clear the mask. So with any brush, normal brush selected, I'll switch back across clay, turn down the strength. I'm holding down the secondary trigger here now, and you can see here that's the smooth brush there. So just like holding down shift and ZBrush, I have to just turn up the strength, and that's the quick way then to mask by just holding down the modifier key. So look out for that in different brushes, whether you have a modifier key like the mask or the regular brushes, or else the invert button, like in other sculpting programs. Inflate brush, yeah, that's just the same as any inflate brush in your sculpting program. Pinch brush, the same, but the difference with pinch brush is I like to switch it here from point over to line, and it can be quite aggressive, the pinch brush here. So I'll often turn down the strength, even the fall off. It can be quite aggressive, but it can actually work as as a sort of a crease brush as well. It can dig in. So just play with the settings there. But yeah, for me, I prefer to set this on the line. Stamp. I'll come back to stamp. It's an interesting one. Standard brush. Yeah, it's just like a standard brush. Pushes out along the surface normal. It's exactly the same as the classic standard brush in ZBrush or whatever other sculpting program. And they're the ones I use the most. There's a couple of other ones here, like tentacle brush, that I probably should add to the quick access wheel, but don't really use it that much, to be honest. And then regularize, I'll show that when I probably do a video on the dynamic topology. So tentacle brush is pretty much the same as, if anyone knows, the snake hook brush and ZBrush. And the interesting thing here is, just like in Sculptress or whatever, in ZBrush you can turn on the dynamic resolution. Like I was saying about the Move Elastic, this is what I'd like to have on Move Elastic, is to have that so that it's always re-topologizing. So yeah, tentacle brush, I tend to turn off that rotate drag. Sometimes they improved it recently, the behavior. I don't use, as I said, I don't use this brush too much, to be honest. It's even in ZBrush, I was never really a snake hook user. Just didn't really have much use for it, but it's here anyway for people that do like that brush. So regularize, I said I'll cover it. Flatten, I don't really use it. I'll just turn this off. I think it's I'm not too sure actually. I don't think I've ever actually used it, but it seems to pull up to a point. I'm not sure. Oh yeah, it's pulling. I'd have to turn this around actually. It seems to be pull. Oh yeah, it's like a planer brush. It's just pulling up to that plane, wherever you have that plane directed to. It doesn't look like it has an invert, or does it? I don't think so, no. So yeah, it's not a brush I've really used. It's, to me now, it just looks like a planer brush. And I probably should mention this again in case people didn't see the other videos. I'll mention actually with the stamp brush about this, about positioning this. So yeah, that's all the brushes I wanted to show. I won't show paint. Paint is just voxel painting. That's sorry, I mean vertex painting, and like poly paint and ZBrush. I showed this in the paint bucket in the materials video. Paint, I might do one of its own short video maybe. So that's all the brushes pretty much. Regularize, I'll put it into the other video with the dynamic topology. Yeah, so over to the stamp brush is definitely an interesting one, because it will actually behave like a boolean. So if I click onto the object, you can see here where it's automatically booleaned the mesh, and then if I invert that, same again, it's going to behave like a boolean. So that's a really interesting one, because you can actually use that with dynamic topology then as well. Now that's way too low. So what I'm going to do is, this will probably be for another video as well, but that syncs up to the voxel remesh, which I will do in another video. So at least it's, oh yeah, I think what I need to do is, I didn't really want to get into this, but they're turned off. That's on absolute, that's at maximum. So what I would have to do there is go in here. This system as well, I think this might be getting reworked as well. Because it's, I don't know, I don't think it definitely needs just a global kind of a switch. Not the strength multiplier, the resolution multiplier. It needs some sort of global switch, I think, like Nomad. Nomad has a really good system. It's just simple. You just have one setting, global setting, and it just works. Whereas there seems to be a lot of tweaking. You can see here, like, I have to really tweak that in, and it kind of wastes a lot of time. But as I was saying there, you can use the stamp and then just use the dynamic topology then just to blend out the the boolean, give you a better topology, or just in general, or use that regularize so that you don't get the smoothing effect, or just use smooth, reduce the strength, and pretty much get the same effect. So yeah, I forgot to mention as well, obviously I'm using the thumbstick here in the primary, left and right, to increase or decrease the strength. So back to the stamp, and that's the basics of it. It's basically just behaves as a boolean on the mesh that you're working on, and it's very handy and quite unique as well, obviously, because you don't have anything like that in regular sculpting programs, and you can increase the polygon density to to match up a bit better to the mesh that you're working on. And obviously then as well, you have all your parameters that you can change, and then you can also change, as I showed in an earlier video, using the thumbstick. If you hold the thumbstick down, you can adjust the size on the fly, so that's pretty handy. And then I also showed this in an earlier video, if you just hover in here with the lightning bolt part of the controller, you can see a little claw appears, and you'll feel it on the haptics if you have it turned on. And then you just grab the side trigger, and you can just position that wherever you like then. And then, depending on how crazy you are, you can sort of work. You can work from anywhere with this. And then to reset that, you can just grab it again and just hit that bottom button on the secondary controller, and that'll reset. That's Shapelab's default position here, which I never use. I don't like it at all. I always have mine down here. So if you want to do that, that's the button to reset. And as I mentioned earlier, then it's also down. It's down here. Where is it? VR settings, reset cursor pose, VR settings. So that's stamp. And the interesting thing about stamp is you can have all sorts of custom. So say for instance, I wanted to create my own custom stamp. You can create them from within here. Like, so say that's what I want to create, whatever I have set up here. You can, from active object, you can import an FBX or an OBJ and create a custom stamp for there. Saves a template for the create tool. So you can also save that for creating primitives in scene mode. And then you just have, these are just, I don't have anything in here myself, but these are just all ones that ship. So that's a really interesting feature. Now, what feature request I have is that would make this a lot better is just to have an option, create new object from stamp, so that you can just, because it's always getting booleaned onto whatever mesh is active. So if you could create new ones, it'd be a really quick way to block out without having to go into scene mode and go to create and then set that up again, whatever you had set up. It just means that you could do it in here if there was just a create new object from stamp. So that's pretty much the brushes. And as I said, from next year, I think the 2026 cycle, the dev cycle, I think there's going to be work done to revamp some of these brushes. Now they're pretty good. Like the clay brush, crease and trim, you're sort of like the mill brush is fantastic straight away. These are all fine, like mask and inflate, standard pinch. They're all fine. There's nothing really wrong with them, which are kind of bread and butter brushes. Excuse me, like your trim, your trim, polish, your crease, and your clay. They're all decent, but they need just that little bit of tweaking. So it'd be great to see that happen now in the coming year, in the 2026 dev cycle. So that's basically it. Yeah, I will probably go into the. Definitely need to do a video on this and just show how this works, because it is a little bit overly complicated. I hope it gets simplified. But yeah, that's basically it. So I will leave it at that.